Hi, my name is Jo. Welcome back to my channel. For today's video, we have a reading wrap-up of all of the books that I've read so far in March. Now, I am filming this on March 24th, and so far I've read 22 books. Obviously, that number is probably going to change by the end of March. But I do have to film this today as I am heading out of the country next weekend. I'll be in London for about a week and then Paris for about a week. So my plan is to film everything that I've read in March thus far, and then next month, I think in my April wrap-up, I'll just throw in any of the March reads that I'm not able to put in this video. Now, before we begin, I do have a couple pieces of book mail just real quick from Etsy that I want to show you. I don't have enough to film a book merch video, so we are just going to throw this in here at the beginning. I love finding small shops on Etsy to support, and sometimes they have the cutest bookish merch. So today I have some stickers and some pins to show you. And I did buy all this with my own money. This is not sponsored or anything. It's not an ad. But like I said, I do love supporting small shops. So I would like to show you what I got, and then I will link them below in case you decide that you also want to invest in some cute bookish merch. First up, I have some stickers from AwfullyNerdyCo. This one here is a book stack of all of the Sarah J Maas books, and it is holographic. So it starts up here with Agatar, works its way through Throne of Glass, and then Crescent City is on the bottom. It's just so fun, and I think that I'll be adding all of these to my laptop because my Kindle is full. There's no more room for any fun stickers. I feel like my laptop is the next best place of honor. Now, the next one I have is the Chestnut Spring series by Elsie Silver. I love that series, and I read all of the books on my Kindle, but I enjoyed it so much that I will definitely be buying the physical copies of those books. And the last sticker I got from this shop is the Never After series. I read all of them except for Cross, which is this one on the very bottom. It is on my TBR, I just haven't gotten around to it yet. And I did just realize that I was also sent a cute little free sticker. And here we have Belle from Beauty and the Beast, and she is reading A Court of Mist and Fury. Next up, I have some Sarah J Maas pins, and this shop is called IridescentFairytale. Each one of these pins focuses on one of the 3 series by Sarah J Maas, and they're all little teacups with details representing each series. First up is the Agatar pin. We have the cereal, we have some paint to represent Feyre, we have the Night Court symbol, and then right up here it does say Recent Feyre in little like soup letters, which is such a cute touch. Next up is this Crescent City pin. We do have one of the little messenger otters here. We have a gate and then the city skyline. And of course, my favorite is the Throne of Glass one. We have the Eye of Elena, the sword, and the stag. These pins are so beautiful. They feel really high quality, and I'm excited to be able to put them on a little pin board and display them. So that is it for my bookish merch. Now we are going to head right into my March wrap up, and I'm going to start with my physical books. I had 5 of those this month. Let's start with Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I did read this one for one of my in-person book clubs. This book is a paranormal romance featuring a marriage of convenience between a vampire and a werewolf. And I was lucky enough to pick up a signed copy, so we have the author's signature right up here. And I had never read an Ali Hazelwood book prior to this, but I really enjoyed this one, so I might be looking into some of her other works. I did end up rating this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed our female main character. I thought that she was pretty witty and clever and funny. I was less of a fan of our male main character, and I feel like if we just had some more scenes that showed more of his personality, I would have felt more connected to him and therefore more connected to the relationship between him and our female main character. A couple things that I really enjoyed about this book: our female main character is a STEM girly, and she's never felt like she's belonged anywhere. With a vampire, she's never felt really like enough of a vampire because she has spent time in the human world. And obviously with the humans, she doesn't fit in because she is a paranormal creature. And with the werewolves, they're just completely different species. So it's really interesting to see her kind of find her own type of found family where she feels like she belongs. And of course, as this is a marriage of convenience book, any and all of the my wife moments are just the best. I did enjoy all the tension in this one, and with the way that it ended, it does feel like we're leading into an anthology. I haven't checked that, but that's definitely the vibe, and I'm hoping that that is the case because I would definitely be invested enough to read the next book in the anthology. I also wrote down 2 quotes that I really liked from this book. The first one says, "I have no friends on the left and only enemies on the right, so I ground myself and look straight ahead at my future husband." And I definitely feel like this quote showcases how she doesn't feel like she belongs anywhere. And the second quote says, "Maybe some things transcend reciprocity. Maybe not everything is about having." So I definitely enjoyed that book, and like I mentioned, I did rate that one 4 stars. Next up, we have Homebody by Ruby Carr. I ended up picking this one up at a thrift store just because it was super cheap, and I have read some of Ruby Carr's work in the past. And unfortunately, I did enjoy her past works more than I enjoyed this one. I think I ended up rating this one about 2.5 stars. In the end, it just felt all very surface level to me. And part of me wonders, I would have to look back at her older works to see how I feel about it today. But I do wonder if I enjoyed her past works more because of how old I was when I read them. Because as I read Homebody, I found myself thinking that even though today at 26 years old, I found this very surface level. I do think that teenage me would have found this very impactful. So perhaps I found her older works more impactful because of my age. And if you enjoy this and this didn't feel surface level to you, I love that for you. I just don't think that this one was for me. Now, on the other hand, the other poetry book I read this month was by Amanda Lovelace. This one is called Flower Crowns and Fearsome Things. I ended up rating this one 4 stars. It's very similar in styling to Ruby Cars. For some reason, Amanda Lovelace just hits home for me like every time. Now, with that being said, this was my least favorite from her, but I still rated it at 4 stars. So with that being said, obviously I enjoy all of her works. And one of the cool things about this is there is some artwork. So we have some pages that look like this, sort of like burning roses, and then some pages that look like this, which definitely has more of like a happy spring type of vibe. She talks about being outspoken. She talks about her relationship with her mother. One of my favorite pieces of one of the poems says, "One day, years from now, when the world stops ending, the first thing I will do is come within 6 feet of you." So I'm so happy to have bought this and to be adding it to my Amanda Lovelace collection. I think that this is just one of those authors where no matter what she comes out with, I'm just going to buy it because I always enjoy her writing, at least to some extent. Next up, we have The Signature Move by Cassandra Diviak. I was really excited about this one. I actually even ordered this copy to be signed. So here at the front, we do have a little quote and a signature from the author. This is an ice skater slash hockey romance that definitely gives enemies to lovers vibes. So let's start with the things that I liked about this book. I liked that we had gay and trans characters, an autistic character, and the storyline itself I enjoyed. Unfortunately, there were just too many negatives for me with this book, most to do with the writing. I did end up rating this one 2 stars. The writing just felt very juvenile to me in the sense that it almost reminded me of like reading a fan fiction. The antagonist in this book was very one-dimensional to me. Like everything that came out of this person's mouth was like a very classic villain type of line. It definitely felt like the antagonist was there like just to be mean. They didn't really have a purpose or anything that necessarily fueled them other than being mean, so the antagonist was just not interesting to me personally. There were also a lot of grammatical mistakes, mostly involving punctuation. And this author is very fond of using an ellipsis like at least once a page. But with all that being said, I think that my least favorite part of the writing, the part that really feels like fan fiction to me, is just that it feels like it needs to be edited down a lot. Like we get the characters brushing their teeth and what their thoughts are on the toothpaste. We get characters locking doors and putting keys into pockets that are convenient for them to grab later. Like things that have nothing to do with the story, and it just feels like we're trying to hit like a word count. None of that was needed. So this one's just not my favorite, and I do want to give trigger warnings for eating disorders and abusive relationships. And then, as if I have not talked about it enough, Happy Place by Emily Henry. I read the audiobook version of this last month, but then I went out and bought the physical version because I wanted to annotate it. So I did reread this one this month, went through and annotated it. I have all of my fun little tabs here. And then I just went through with some translucent sticky notes, made some notes, underlined some items, and I'm very happy to have this in my collection. I'll probably end up buying a few different versions of this just because I do adore the book so much, and there are some great versions out there, like from Waterstones. Definitely one that I will be rereading in the future. I rated this one 5 stars, and we'll probably talk about it forever. So now we are moving on to the books I read on my Kindle in March. Next up is The Yellow Wallpaper. This one's fairly short, and I have seen it classified as Gothic literature. So in this one, for the time being, a woman has moved into a house with her husband, and her husband is a doctor who feels like she is sick. She's a little bit paranoid, and he tells her that she just needs to rest. So she's basically locked in this room, and this wallpaper inside of the room is driving her crazy. Like she feels as though the wallpaper is changing. There are people in the wallpaper is rotting. And because the story is told from this woman's point of view, we are forced to wonder if she really is going crazy or if these things are really happening. We have to wonder if her husband is really doing his best as a doctor and giving her like the proper diagnosis, or is he gaslighting her? Is she going mad, and are the people around her dealing with it in the right way? I ended up loving this one. I rated it 4.5 stars, and I'm very curious to now do some like online digging and see other people's theories, and then maybe after I've read other people's theories, I might go back and reread it. It's interesting how it makes you think about mental illness, specifically in women, because how many times have we been told like we're just crazy or overreacting or our hormones are out of whack? So again, definitely recommend this one. Next up is Home Run Proposal by Maren Moore, and I ended up rating this one 3 stars. It is a baseball romance. So our 2 main characters go to the same university and they actually live together. The female main character and her best friend are in the same grade. They are both freshmen, and her best friend's older brother has already been living on campus. So the 3 of them move in together. So we have tropes like forced proximity and best friend's brother. I thought one of the strong suits in this book was the really good communication between our 2 main characters. And I also loved that our female main character reminded me so much of myself in the sense that she's really into things like the paranormal and ghosts. She actually runs her own like spooky podcast with her best friend, and she watches things like Unsolved Mysteries and Ghost Adventures. And it's cool to see a character like that sort of mesh and build a relationship with someone like our male main character who's just really into baseball. Now, as far as the negatives go, there were definitely some editing errors, specifically with punctuation, and a lot of the scenes and conversations felt repetitive. So if we had just edited those down down and edited our punctuation better, I think I would have rated it higher. Next up, we have another sports romance, but this one is called Icebound by Meredith Trapp, and it is a hockey romance. This is an age gap romance, and there's a little bit of fake dating. I really enjoyed this one. I rated it 4 stars. So our male main character is in his 30s. He's a professional hockey player, and in his 20s, he was definitely a bit of a playboy, and that got him into some trouble. So now he's at the point in his life where he's like trying to settle down. He has a cat. He wants to do like wife and kids. And our female main character is very different. She's in her 20s and she's not quite ready for those stages of life yet. But when the two of them meet, a conversation leads to him assuming she's much older than she is and that she's a doctor, when in reality she's an art student and like an Uber driver. Now, if you're someone like me and the idea of like lying being a foundation of a relationship just really freaks you out and is of no interest to you, I do want to let you know that that doesn't take place the whole book. That's definitely just more so the very start of their relationship, and then we get to see how it evolves from there. And one of my favorite parts about this book, outside of the relationship between these two people where there's great tension and great banter, was that our female main character actually struggles with anxiety. She takes Xanax to deal with her anxiety sometimes. And I relate to that very much, and I was pretty content with how her anxiety was shown on page. I feel like sometimes when it comes to mental illness in books, specifically with anxiety, it can be written as either not a big deal or it's written in a way where it's like extremely dramatic and just not realistic. And I felt like the way that this one was written was pretty spot on. It felt very realistic and it felt really relatable, and it added another facet to this character that I already really enjoyed. So if you want a multi-dimensional female main character and a male main character who plays hockey and also has a cat and also cross stitches, this is the book for you. And the last book that I read on my Kindle this month is A Photo Finish by Elsie Silver. This is a small town romance. There's forced proximity, there's an age gap. This one also has big grumpy sunshine vibes, and it's technically a second chance romance. So our two main characters met online and had an online relationship where the male main character ends up knowing what the female main character looks like, but the reverse isn't true. Our female main character doesn't really know anything about the male main character, what he looks like, what his real name is, etc. When they end up meeting in person, it's a little bit awkward. Some time goes by where they're just sort of avoiding each other, but then an accident occurs where forced proximity is forced to happen. The tension is amazing. We get disability rep, which I adore, and our male main character is in therapy. And he's not in therapy because of the girl. Like, he's in therapy from the very beginning of the book, which I really enjoy when we get to see a character go in therapy and it has nothing to do with the romantic relationship. I think that's actually really nice representation. And we get some flashbacks of their online relationship, which I think is a really nice addition. There were some editing errors, and this wasn't my favorite Elsie Silver book. I think she has some that just exceed this. So in the end, I rated this one 3.5 stars. Okay, and that is it for the Kindle books I have finished, but I am in the middle of 2 more Kindle books and I have a feeling I'll be done with them by the end of March, so I'm just gonna throw them out there. The first one that I am almost done with is Catching Feelings by Maren Moore, and this is the second book in the same anthology as Home Run Proposal, and I'm already enjoying it more, so I have a very strong feeling that I'll be grading it higher than Home Run Proposal. This is another baseball romance. There is so much good chemistry and banter. There are definitely still some editing errors, which is tough for me because I love editing. That's like my dream job, but ignoring those for just a second, I do really love our two main characters, both in the relationship and just as individual characters. I think they're also interesting in that regard. And they also have some things that they're dealing with that are just very real and raw. Like, our male main character has ADHD. Our female main character is still dealing with the mourning of her father who passed away a few years prior to the book taking place. And then the other book that I am currently reading is called The Heart Forger. And this is the second book in the Bone Witch trilogy. I read the first one as an audiobook, so I'll be talking about that in just a minute. But it is a dark YA fantasy, and so far, I'm still very early on in the book, but so far the vibe that I'm feeling is that I will enjoy this one a bit more than the first. And for the last section of this video, let's talk about all the audiobooks that I read in March. The first one is Twisted Love, and this is a book that I was reading for one of my book clubs. This definitely was not my favorite. I ended up rating it 2.5 stars. There are lots of tropes, so I actually made a list so that I don't forget any. We have Touch Her and Die, Grumpy Sunshine, Like Opposites Attract, Brother's Best Friend, Forced Proximity, and Forbidden Love. So basically with this one, our female main character's brother is heading away for a year, and he's asking his best friend to watch over his sister for that time. So with our male main character, he is very much like the guy who has this like scary backstory, scary vibe. My problem with that is that it's constantly suggested that he has done all of these horrible things, and we get zero specifics. So like at no point am I truly scared of him, or I'm not really feeling like the tension that I think the author's trying to put out there, because I don't know what that means. I don't know why we should be like worried about him being with our female main character. There's also just a lot of different plot points. Like at one point, our female main character and her friend are just trying to plot a course of like getting this male main character to elicit emotions. And then we have some weird stuff happen with our female main character's parents. Our male main character has a family member who also is evil. At one point they end up parting ways, and the way that they come back together towards the end of the book is just odd to me. I did find it very entertaining at parts, but I do not think that this is an anthology where I will be continuing on. Next up, I read 2 books in the Never After series. One was Twisted and one was Hooked, and I rated both of them 3 stars. And both of these are dark romances, so be sure to check trigger warnings. This one is Aladdin inspired, and the characters that it's sort of inspired by specifically are Jafar and Jasmine. There's a marriage of convenience, some touch her and die moments, forced proximity. The main negative for this one for me is that the falling in love portion between our 2 main characters just sort of happens. I didn't feel like a lead up occurring. It was sort of just all of a sudden feelings are different. I did find myself invested in the story itself. Our Jafar character is trying to worm his way into the company's leadership. The Jasmine character is just concerned about her father dealing with a sickness. And the 2 of them together definitely did have chemistry, but just when that changed, I felt like we weren't all aboard the same train. And Hooked is inspired by Peter Pan, with the characters that we are focusing on being inspired by Wendy and Captain Hook. And I like the storyline of this one as well because we have like 2 competing companies, and Wendy is the daughter of Hook's rival. And I just think these stories are so entertaining because 1, we all know the original stories, and 2, it's very much so like the villain gets the girl. So if you've ever been interested in the villain getting the girl, this series might be for you. Next up, I read the 2 books in Tessa Bailey's Vine Mess duology. The first one is called Secretly Yours, and this is an opposites attract second chance romance. Our female main character is very much a go with the flow type of person, and she is a gardener. Our male main character, on the other hand, is very type A. He's a professor and he is using some time off to write a book, and he's on a very strict schedule that he has created for himself. The 2 of them met when they were younger in high school, and our female main character has sort of been consumed by her infatuation with our male main character ever since then. And our male main character, on the other hand, doesn't really remember her. Now that they are meeting again when they're older, I think there are some great conversations around infatuation versus love. Unfortunately, the relationship between our 2 main characters, which is like the core of the story, just wasn't really for me. I ended up reading this one 2.5 stars. There was one storyline which the book is literally named after, which involved a secret admirer, and I just did not feel like that storyline was at all necessary, and it sort of comes out of nowhere in the middle-ish part of the book. And as with most romance books, there is a 3rd act breakup, and the miscommunication that leads to the reasoning behind the 3rd act breakup was just, I just didn't think it was at all necessary. I don't know why that happened. What I can say though is that I also read the 2nd book, which is called Unfortunately Yours, and I loved this one. I rated this one 4 stars, and it is another second chance romance, but the vibes are super different. This one has a marriage of convenience, and I wouldn't say that it's like enemies to lovers, but there's definitely that type of vibe, that type of tension. In this one, both of our main characters have something to prove, so maybe that's why I enjoyed this more. I think that it's really important for romance books to obviously have like a great connection between our 2 main characters. I think that that's obviously very important, but I think I only become super invested in these books when our 2 main characters separately have their own great storylines, great motivators, and great backgrounds, and I think that this book covered those topics and bases better than the first. So our male main character is running this winery, okay, and the wine is bad, and that's because he doesn't really know how to run a winery because this wasn't his dream. This is his deceased best friend's dream, so he's just trying to make this happen because of the love he has for his friend. Now our female main character, on the other hand, she is working her way through a failed engagement and getting fired from her job. So she's trying to prove to herself and to her family and to the people that she used to work with that she's capable of more and that she's deserving of more. And when they both end up benefiting from a marriage of convenience, a really fun love story occurs where both of them learn to better communicate. Trigger warnings for this one, I would say, include both PTSD and slight alcohol abuse. Next up, I read both novellas in Holly Black's Folk of the Air series. I adored the 3 main books in this series, and so I was really excited to dive into these novellas. The first one is called The Lost Sisters, and this focuses on Taryn, who is just not my favorite character. I ended up rating this one 3 stars, and it has nothing to do with the writing. I think Holly Black is a fantastic writer, and I love the world that she has built in the series, but because I don't connect with Taryn as a character, this novella just was so-so for me, and one that I will not be rereading. So while that one's 3 stars, I did rate How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories 4 stars. To no one's surprise, I enjoy Cardan as a character more than Taryn, so that already was a great foundation and basis for this novella, and I think that getting more of a backstory and perspective from Cardan will impact my rereading of the series more than, say, Taryn's. With this one, we get to see him go through what he goes through as a kid with his family. family. And it makes even more sense how that has impacted him as he's grown, both in relation to like his family and the throne, as well as his relationship that occurs with Jude. So when I inevitably end up rereading this series, because I do adore it, I will definitely be rereading How the King of Alfheim Learned to Hate Stories as part of that, while I probably won't be doing that with The Lost Sisters. Next up, I read Heartless Hunter, which is the first book in the Crimson Moth duology. The genre for this book says it is a YA fantasy, and this was one of the books that one of my in real life book clubs chose to read, so I was obviously just gonna go with it because it's a book club pick. But I'm always like a little wary of young adult reads because sometimes it's a hit and sometimes it's a miss for me. I felt like this one could just be categorized as a fantasy. I didn't feel like it was a young adult book, but that is the category it's under. I ended up really enjoying this book, and our main characters include a witch and a witch hunter. And if that reminds you of Powerless by Lauren Roberts, same, but I actually enjoyed this one a lot more. In fact, it also reminded me of How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, but like a romantasy version. Because both the female and the male main character are using each other without the other knowing it. And while they're busy using each other as a witch and witch hunter, they end up falling for each other. I also find both of their pasts to be complicated and interesting. I think that some of the side characters are great. I think that it ends on a fascinating cliffhanger where I am super excited for the second one. And really my only critique with this book, the only reason that it's not higher, like a 4.5 or a 5-star rating for me, is because of what's lacking from our female main character's storyline. So with her, she is this like witch vigilante, but we only get to see her in action on page once. And even then it's sort of like a messed up mission. So had we gotten the chance to see that part of her story on page more, I think that it would have been more impactful, especially towards the end. Next up in my audiobooks, I read Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which is part of the Bridgerton anthology, and it is a historical romance. Now this one is centered around Penelope and Colin, so it is a friends to lovers romance, and it is the next season of the Bridgerton series that will be out on Netflix. So I was really excited about this one because some of the trailers for this upcoming season had just come out, and I do have to say that I am more excited for the show than the book, how the book ended. The thing with this book series is that it's just a little dated, and it's been a consistent theme in the books that I've read so far. I've read 4 of them in this series, that I just feel like all of the women deserve better than the men, and how the men treat them. And because of that, I did rate this one 3.5 stars. I think if Colin treated Penelope how I think he'll treat her in the show, it would have been higher, but because he just wasn't as nice of a person as I would have hoped, I wasn't as invested in the relationship. However, I love Penelope, and I loved the side of Penelope we got in this book. She's becoming more confident as time has passed and as she's aged. And Colin getting to see the side of her is interesting, as well as Colin experiencing some jealousy over what Penelope has accomplished. I love seeing a successful female main character. I just wish on Colin's part maybe that there had been a bit more groveling, which it seems like from the trailers we'll at least get in the show, so fingers crossed. Next up is Neon Gods, which is a Hades and Persephone retelling, and I ended up rating this one 4 stars. It is a dark romance, so be sure to check trigger warnings. A few things I loved about this book. I loved that Hermes was a woman. I loved that both Hades and Persephone are in the LGBT community, and I love the open communication. Honestly, when it comes to Hades and Persephone retellings, I'm always just invested and I'm a sucker for them, so it's not surprising that I rated this one so highly. And I probably would have rated it even higher if I got a better understanding of like what the world looked like. Because I read the whole book and I'm still confused about whether this is taking place on Earth, in a fantasy world, are we in a city that's somewhere else? I do plan on continuing this series, so maybe in one of the other books I'll get more of an answer. But as it stands with this one, I still really enjoyed it enough to rate it 4 stars. Next up, we have the first book in the Bone Witch trilogy. Like I mentioned before, it is a dark YA fantasy. This book is very mystical, so if you're a mood reader, I think this would be a perfect pick to read during the Halloween time season. So I ended up rating this book 3.5 stars. I think that the beginning and the end were great. And these 2 areas are where the most like action adventure happens. The big chunk in the middle is where I sort of found myself getting a bit bored, found it a bit slow. It's a lot of training for our female main character who is a bone witch. And so while that chunk was happening, the whole time I was sort of expecting more conflict or maybe more missions, but it really just focuses on her training. So my hope is that this training piece moves us forward in books 2 and 3 with more action-packed sequences. And lastly, I do feel like this is one of those books where it's more plot-driven than character-driven, and I'm a big character-driven book lover. So if you're the opposite, I think you might actually enjoy this a little bit more than I did. Next up, we have Off to the Races by Elsie Silver. This is a small town romance with a few different tropes that I wrote down here. We have enemies to lovers, he falls first, employee boss, and grumpy sunshine. Now it's Elsie Silver, so I enjoyed the book. However, out of all of the books that I read by Elsie Silver, I think that this one was probably my least favorite. Now, potentially worth noting is that this is the only audiobook I've read of Elsie Silver's. Everything else I've read on my Kindle, so maybe that impacted my experience. So our male main character works on a farm, or like partially owns the farm, and he has this horse that he thinks could potentially be like a winning racehorse, but there's a lot of growth that still needs to happen with the horse. So he hires our female main character and they just get off on a really rocky start. And from the rocky start, their relationship progresses, and it's just that I ended up finding myself more invested in the relationship between our female main character and this horse she was working with than her relationship with our male main character. Now, as we know, I am a sucker for the found family trope. I think that that is just the best, and there was a really good quote about that. It says, sometimes you're born into a family and other times you choose them, and when you choose them, you know in your bones that they're right for you. So I love that, and pieces of the story like our female main character and the horse, and her with some of our side characters. I just felt like maybe our male main character was lacking a little bit. And the last two audiobooks that I have fully finished this month are Caraval and Legendary. With Caraval, I ended up rating it 3 stars. I think Caraval is whimsical, that the magic is really fun, that a lot of the descriptions are beautiful and colorful, but I think that a lot of our side characters were completely one-dimensional, and I found myself extremely frustrated with our female main character almost the whole time because she was always confused and making strange choices, and even when she was like telling the truth to people or trying to get help, no one would believe her, which was also infuriating. There's also an arranged engagement storyline, which felt unnecessary. I don't know if that's somehow going to be more purposeful later on in the series, but again, I did read Legendary, so we only have one more book to go. So even though it was definitely a fun ride, I don't foresee myself like rereading this because of how frustrated I was as a reader during it. Now, on the flip side, I really enjoyed Legendary. I felt like this one had more of a distinct plotline. It had a great cliffhanger where I'm really excited for the last book, which is called Finale, but it kept all the things that I enjoyed about the first book, like the really great descriptions and similes. I was very surprised that I ended up liking our female main character so much in this book because she is a side character in the first book that I was so about to be kind. I found her reason for partaking in Caraval more fascinating than our character in the first book, and because of how this book went, I am really excited to read Finale, and I'm reading all of these to get through to Once Upon a Broken Heart because everyone is very happy with that series, and I want to have the context, I want to be involved, and I'm almost there. And the last audiobook I want to mention is one that I'm about halfway through, and that is A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. I know I'll definitely finish it in March, just didn't get through it before I recorded this video, but this one is another Hades and Persephone retelling, and I'm loving it so far, so I'm excited to see where it goes and then hopefully continue on with the series. That concludes my March wrap up, at least thus far. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.